Hey everyone, welcome to Molten Hues. I'm learning the art of stained glass, and in every video, I'm creating a new piece inspired by an incredible true story from history. And while I work, I'll tell you one of the most fascinating, unbelievable, and sometimes hilarious stories the world has ever seen. Stick around until the end to see the finished stained glass reveal, and if you enjoy these stories and any of the artwork, don't forget to like and subscribe and join me for the next one. Now, imagine if your government declared war not on another country, not on an invading army, but on birds. And somehow the birds won. As crazy as it sounds, in 1932, the Australian military was set to battle against thousands of emus, large, flightless birds standing nearly 6 feet tall. What followed became one of the strangest, funniest chapters in military history. Let's dive in to the Great Emu War. To understand why this happened, we have to go back to the early 1930s. Australia was struggling through the Great Depression. Money was tight, and many of the World War I veterans were given farmland in Western Australia as a reward for their service. The government hoped that these former soldiers could build new lives becoming farmers. Unfortunately, the land wasn't ideal, and the soil was poor, and the weather was very unpredictable. And making a living was already incredibly difficult. Then another problem arrived, about 20,000 of them. Every year, huge flocks of emus migrated across Australia after breeding season, and their route happened to pass directly upon these farmers. And the birds discovered something amazing: fresh wheat fields. Really quick before I continue my story, these next pieces in the black were so hard for me to cut. The T and the B, the little curved parts for me were pretty difficult. I did break one in half and I had to redo it. But the other one, I broke just the corner of the tip off and I just lived with it and kept going. But I'm not the best yet at cutting curves. I am still learning, but I'm getting there. Okay, so since there is fresh wheat fields, to an emu, it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. Within days, they could destroy months of hard work. But eating the crops wasn't even the worst part. As they moved through fences, they knocked them down, creating openings that allowed rabbits to flood into the farms. Now, the farmers had two problems: thousands of hungry birds and thousands of hungry rabbits. The farmers were desperate. Many of these farmers had served in World War I. So they contacted the Australian government asking for help. After all, they had fought for their country. Now they wanted their country to fight for them, and surprisingly they agreed. Instead of sending wildlife experts, they sent soldiers. The military deployed Major G.P.W. Meredith, along with several soldiers, and their weapon were 2 Lewis machine guns. Those were some crazy looking guns, the same type that was used during World War I. They also brought about 10,000 rounds of ammo. And the plan sounded simple: find the birds, open fire, problem solved, or so they thought. These were the tiniest pieces I had to make. They're kind of unavoidable. I had to do one for the trigger, and I didn't want to make a gigantic piece, so I had to make a little tiny trigger, and it was kind of cute. I had to grind a lot of it off, but it worked out just fine. Okay, so the soldiers quickly found large groups of emus, which was perfect. They quietly moved in position. They waited until the birds were close enough, and then boom, they opened fire. But what happened next completely shocked them. The emus scattered in every direction, and instead of staying together, they broke into dozens of smaller groups. They were trying to aim a heavy machine gun at hundreds of birds, spreading in different directions. It turned out almost impossible. Many escaped untouched. Some even suggested that only a handful were hit. The soldiers had badly underestimated their opponent. The more the military fought, the stranger things became. Observers noticed something fascinating. The emus actually seemed organized. Large flocks often had 1 or 2 birds acting almost like lookouts. These birds would watch for danger while the others fed. If they spotted a soldier, they'd signal the flock. Suddenly, thousands of birds would sprint away before the soldiers even had a chance to fire. Whether this was intentional coordination or simply instinct, it made the birds surprisingly difficult targets. Major Meredith reportedly joked that if Australia ever needed an army, the emus would make excellent soldiers. The military wasn't ready to admit defeat. Someone had an idea. Instead of waiting for the birds, why not chase them? They mounted one of the machine guns onto a truck. It sounded brilliant. Driving alongside the emus, firing continuously. Mission accomplished. Except the truck bounced wildly over rough farmland, and the gunner couldn't aim. The vehicle couldn't keep up with the birds, and the emus easily outran it anyways. The plan was the absolute disaster. Little progress as days passed. Thousands of rounds were fired, but number of birds eliminated were surprisingly small. Some estimates suggest fewer than 1,000 emus have been killed, despite nearly 10,000 rounds have been used. Really quick here, I love pink glass, and I love this pink glass. But for some reason, I don't know if it was terrible quality or what, but I had the hardest time getting it to cut. I don't know if you see all these shattered pink glass on the top of the blue mat. I literally would cut it and it would just shatter every time I went to use the pliers, and I would literally just have to pick it all off. And every few seconds, I'd have to like scrape it all off my hands or off the mat. It would just keep going into my fingers. It was absolutely terrible. All right, so this operation is becoming more expensive, and the newspaper couldn't resist. Headlines began mocking the military. Stories joked that Australia was losing a war against birds. People laughed across the country. I mean, I'm still laughing about it. I think it's hilarious. The Great Emu War had become a national entertainment. Eventually, the government called off the operation. The soldiers packed up, machine guns went home, and the emus, well, they stuck around. The farmers were still dealing with the birds. Eventually, Australia focused on different solutions, including better fencing, a bounty program rather than military action. Those methods proved much more effective. Today, you'll hear people say Australia lost a war against emus, which is a funny way to tell a story, but it's technically not true. There was never really official declaration of war. This was a military-assisted operation, however. The military absolutely failed to accomplish its objective. The birds continued to migrate, and the crops continued to suffer. And if history remembered the event as one of the strangest military operations ever attempted. The Great Emu War has survived almost a century because it feels like a satire. If someone were to make it into a comedy movie today, you'd probably think it's exaggerated. Kind of like that bear movie on cocaine. I think that might be a real story as well. But it really happened. It reminds us that nature doesn't always cooperate with humans' plans. Sometimes even modern equipment isn't enough. And sometimes the funniest stories in history are completely true. Now, I really wanted to make an emu for this story, but I couldn't figure out how to make an emu from stained glass. It would have just been a big circle, and I would have just ended up drawing on it for the head, and I don't really know how to recreate feathers. So I chose the gun. Now, I didn't make the gun that they had back in World War I. Now, that gun was crazy. If you Google it, it's like this huge barrel of a gun, and I can't even believe they used to use those. So I did just end up doing a handgun, and of course, I wanted to put some cute little flowers on it. So what do you think? If someone told you your story without any proof, you'd probably think it's completely made up. I mean, imagine being one of those soldiers. You spend years training for the military service. You learn discipline, tactics, and how to operate machine guns. And then one day, your commanding officer says, "Hey, congratulations. Tomorrow you're going to war with birds." I'd probably think I was being pranked. And then I'd imagine being one of those farmers watching this all unfold. You're hoping the military will finally going to solve your biggest problem. And instead, you watch thousands of emus casually outrun soldiers with machine guns. And at some point, you have to wonder if the birds knew something everyone else didn't. Even Major Meredith, the officer leading the operation, he joked that the emus had machine guns, they would be an unbeatable army. That's the kind of quote that makes the story somewhat impossible to forget. I think that's why people still talk about the Great Emu Wars almost 100 years later. It isn't because it's a major military conflict, it's because it's one of those rare moments in history where reality is somehow funnier than fiction. And honestly, that's one of my favorite things about history. Sometimes the most unbelievable stories aren't myths or legends, they actually did happen. And that's exactly why I wanted to start this channel. Every time I sit down at this workbench, I get to learn something new while creating something with my hands. Whether it's a strange historical event or an incredible survival story, or one of those moments that make you stop and say, hey, wait, was that real? I get to turn that into a piece of stained glass. It's been a lot of fun putting this one together, and I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me today. Now I got a question for you. If you were in charge back in 1932, how would you have solved the Australian emu problem? Would you have tried something completely different, or do you think the military never should have been involved in the first place? Let me know down in the comments, and some of your suggestions might even inspire future videos. If you enjoyed today's story and you'd like to see more fascinating moments from history while I create stained glass together, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and it lets me keep making videos like this. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, and I'll see you in the next one. And hopefully the next story involves a little less military embarrassment.